welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. Let's talk about math and Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin. So here's how this video is going to go. I'm going to talk about Stranger of Paradise. I'm going to talk about different elements of it, focusing in on the gameplay, then focusing in even more on the combat, and talking about how, everything links up in the math along the way. And in that process, I'm also going to be talking about my experience with the game and my feelings towards it. And I will be talking about the story. And so, fair warning, spoilers ahead, right? Spoilers for Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. Spoilers for Final Fantasy, aka Final Fantasy 1. Honestly, you can just say spoilers for everything Final Fantasy just to be safe. I do want to bring up Final Fantasy 7. And if you've played Final Fantasy 7 or the remakes, you probably get why I'm going to bring that up or why I want to bring that up in relation to Stranger of Paradise and Final Fantasy 1 if you've played those games. In any case, I don't want to get too far into that right now until we get into the larger part of the video. But I just wanted to bring that up because, yeah, just to see all the spoilers, because I don't want to hold back at all. So, with that in mind, if you're still on board, let's get into it. So, to start, I'm going to give a little background with Stranger of Paradise in that larger sense. Nothing like too elaborate, but also background on this video and how something that I did feel was unfortunate actually works thematically for it. And then we're going to get into the combat and everything else. Okay, so to start, Stranger of Paradise is an action RPG. And it takes place in the world of Final Fantasy, aka Final Fantasy 1. And then it's an action RPG that I like, and we'll get into that. Combat is very much at its core, and you can make an argument for that for a lot of Final Fantasy games. In any case, like I dig it. So it came out in 2022, right? 35 years after Final Fantasy came out, back in 1987. For the record, that is my birth year. So I like that me and Final Fantasy have that in common. So it's an interesting game for the gameplay and the story in and of itself, but how it links up to that original Final Fantasy, because right you have a game coming out 35 years after that first game, and it's doing a few things right. So it is serving as a prequel, but it's also serving as a remake of sorts, which actually does work with the themes of the game. Um, and I like that. And it reminded me of Final Fantasy VII. So I'm gonna talk about Stranger of Paradise for a little bit more, talk about Final Fantasy VII real quick, and then just kind of go back in. Okay, so I say that it works just kind of like a remake of sorts because right you meet a lot of the characters that you meet in Final Fantasy 1. You're definitely in that same world, notably Cornelia, um, and you're dealing with a lot of the same sort of events and themes, right? You're doing the same beats, and that works with the themes of the game. So I like that it's doing that, and it reminded me of Final Fantasy VII because with Final Fantasy VII, right? If you've played the remake games, if you played the remake games, you'll note something. If you've played the original, or if you read things, or talked about things, heard about things, um, those remake games, like Remake, Rebirth, and eventually the third one that'll come out, right? They serve as remakes, sure, right? They're bringing that Final Fantasy energy and everything else with it into the modern age, right? But it also serves as a sequel to just like everything that came before it in some crazy ways. And I won't go too far in that, but I thought that was interesting. And so you have that happening with Final Fantasy VII and its remakes. But then over here we have Final Fantasy 1 and we have Stranger of Paradise, and it's that same sort of dynamic where we have something and it's not meant to be a remake. It's meant to serve as a prequel in this nature, among other things. but it's also functioning as a remake. So I like that it's kind of like the other way around in a sense, than Final Fantasy VII. So I thought all that was cool, like leading up into it. You don't necessarily need to play Final Fantasy, you know, aka Final Fantasy One, in order to enjoy Stranger of Paradise, but I do think it helps. And um, ooh, see, it's tricky, right? Because like I want to talk about that a little bit more, but I do want to get into the gameplay. But for now, I'll say that there's a whole thing about loops, and it all makes sense with Final Fantasy One in Stranger of Paradise, and we'll get back to that when I talk about the story segment. And before I get into the comment, there is one more thing that I want to say about loops. Okay, so I am having a day, and I bring that up because, well, the temptation is just to stay to myself, do my thing, rest up, and all that. I have been playing a lot of Stranger of Paradise. Everything's very fresh, and I wanted to make a video on it. But I got in my own head a lot, countless amounts of times. Over and over, I found myself in a loop. And with this video, I hope to break that loop. And here's the thing that's funny to me, because I do plan to keep on going with this, regardless of what happens with it. Um, I was getting frustrated because I would do the video, right, and it would be fine, but there would be like a collection of things that I didn't like about said videos, and so I just would stop and start over, and it was frustrating me because like one, I kept on making some mistakes that I didn't like, like a thing here, a thing there, that won't matter. I'm human, same as everybody else, but today it really bothered me, and so I found myself getting annoyed by making those mistakes. But then I found myself getting annoyed because it's like, whoa, the stuff wasn't bad. But I kept on getting in my own way. And that felt like a bad thing. But then I thought about it. I thought about Stranger of Paradise, thought about Final Fantasy One. I thought about how important and crucial the idea of loops are in there because, we're dealing with giant time loops and repeating this process and that process, trying to get better results. And here I am doing the same thing with my video. And honestly, with other videos in the past and with other things in the past. And it's just like, art imitating life, life imitating art, that whole situation, right? So I thought that was cool. Um, and now I want to get into the combat. There's so much I wanted to talk about with this video. Okay, so with the combat, if you're still along for the ride, but even if you're not, I'm having fun. So here we are. Um, see, this is the kind of point where I'd probably stop if I was still feeling how I was earlier. In any case, like when we're dealing with the combat, at its core, what's the idea? Um, you are trying to, stop yourself from going to zero health, right? While trying to make your opponents go to zero health, right? So the idea is you're trying to dish out damage while trying to avoid it. And if you can't avoid it, trying to negate it or recover from it, right? Um, Whatever case may be, it's something that's mathematical in nature. And I think that's cool. Now, how does that play out in Stranger of Paradise, right? Because what I said, it works for like anything with video game combat, any combat situation in general, right? You have a certain amount of health, your opponent has a certain amount of health, you're trying to keep yours, you're trying to get rid of theirs. And how it plays out in Stranger of Paradise is quite frankly bonkers, but like in the best way. Um, so here's the thing, right? With combat, right, we have this action RPG, and we have the idea that, like, first and foremost, right, we have our stats, we have different weapons, we have experience, and let's talk about how all that kind of connects. So, as you're going forward and you're trying to take out your opponents, um, you have your stats, they have theirs, and as far as like your stats go, on the base level, you have HP, you have MP, you have break, you have strength, stamina, agility, luck, spirit, intellect, um, physical attack, physical defense, magical attack, magical defense. And you have like this interplay between your stats and your weapons and your armor and your equipment. Um, I'm sorry. With the equipment, you have your armor and you have your accessories. So you have all these things, and they all contribute to your combat. And that idea of you trying to dish out damage while trying to not take it. So we had this basic idea, and already it's starting to expand, and it's just math all across the way. So you have your basic stats, right? And they get boosted as you go along, right? With this game, it's kind of like Final Fantasy 2 in the sense that you don't have traditional levels. Like you have the benefits of leveling up, right? Without seeing the actual level for you. You see it in your weapons, you see it in your accessories, you see it in your armor and stuff like that. And it kind of gives you a gauge of where you are as well as the actual value of things, right? Because like you see your HP increase, MP, and then like all the other stats, right? Um, but you don't see that traditional level like you're used to seeing. So you don't see the level one, level two, level three for your characters. You see it for your armor. In any case, right? Um, there's math and your weapons. They can gain experience points. They can level up. They can give you different stat boosts. And there's also math in your armor and like different stat boosts and different buffs and stuff that you can get from all that. Um, or sorry, boost. With buff, I'm thinking a different thing, and we'll get to that too. So you have some of the things that I mentioned, and all these impact how you're dealing with things in battle, just on that more meta level, right? And you have the job system. So the job system is something that's been, part of Final Fantasy forever, part of a lot of other RPGs, whether we're talking about video game RPGs or tabletop RPGs. Um, and with these jobs, they come with their own stat boosts, right? They come with their own abilities. They allow you to do a variety of things, and I feel like at least in my opinion, there aren't any like bad classes. They all allow you to do different things. And so as you're going on and you're battling, you're gaining experience. You're getting more powerful. You're able to dish out more damage. You're able to take less. You're able to recover better. And then on top of that, you have things like potions to recover your health along the way. And throughout the game, the character that you're playing is Jack, and Jack has allies: Ash, Neon, Sophia, Jed, and you can choose two of them at any given moment to go on missions with Jack. Um, and they come with the same things that Jack does, right? They have their own weapons, their own armor, their own accessories, their own classes. And so you're mixing, you're mashing, you're customizing, and there's just math at every step along the way. And so, again, you have this basic idea, dishing out damage while trying to not take it. And you have so many options that, like, help you figure that out. So many different aspects, because, like, hey, you can pick your armor, you can pick your weapons, you can pick your accessories, you have different jobs. You're getting experience, right? You're finding different weapons, and as you're battling your opponents, they are dropping things, right? And that matters, right? Because you're getting better armor, better weapons, etc. Right? Is you're beating them, so it's like it's in your best interest to do well, right? And then when you're actually out there, right? You can lock onto your opponents. You can monitor their health while monitoring yours. The same with the MP, same with HP, same with break. And as you're going on, like you just have to manage everything. You're practicing resource management while getting this equipment, that equipment, and just leveling up how you want to level up. And I think that's really cool. And I wanted to talk about break. So when it comes to break, that is something that both you and your opponents have, right? And so when you're dealing with your break age and you're managing that whole thing, you want to keep it going because like if it goes to zero, then you're left defenseless and your max MP will drop down. And you don't want that, right? And then on the flip side, if you can get, you know, your opponent's break gauge to go to zero, then you can dish out more damage, right? You can bring the pain. And your abilities help with that. And with your abilities, they come with a variety of different things, right? Because it's not just dealing damage, right? Some of them come with some buffs to your stats, right? And they can do just so many different things. And so while you're on the ground, you have all the stuff that I mentioned that was behind the scenes, but you can have a variety of things that you can do in battle, right? With some of the abilities, You might be able to do like a flurry of attacks, right? Like you may be able to do a heavier attack. You may be able to do various types of magic, whether we're talking about black magic or white magic, right? You can jump onto the air if you're doing like if you have a dragoon is your job. There was a better way to say it. But my whole thing is just there's so many different aspects that go into your combat in Stranger of Paradise, and there's so many different options. And what's cool to me is that is you're navigating things, is you're figuring out right, like is you're tricking out your characters, you're navigating the story, right? You have to be, more powerful as you progress. You have to be more skilled as you progress. You have to grow. You have to evolve as your characters do, right? And they're evolving as you do. And so the combat is cool in and of itself, but it's being used to navigate the narrative in more ways than one, right? Because like the idea of combat is just very crucial to the narrative and how strong our characters are becoming. And I think that's all interesting. I think that's all cool, and I like it. I like it a lot. And so there's so many different things to talk about, but I guess to kind of bring it all together. So with the combat, right, you have that basic idea of dishing out damage while trying to avoid taking it, and it's like, well, how do you do that, right? Well, you go out there, and there are several things that you can do in the field, right? Like you can equip yourself with different attacks, some that hit hard, some that hit fast, some that do both, some that like work at a distance, some that work up close and personal, and you gotta decide what works the best for you and what job you're using in any given situation. And while you're out on the field, you can alternate between two jobs at a time. And all the while you're figuring all this out, you're battling your opponents, trying to take their health to zero while you're keeping yours, and you're having them drop items, right? Some of these things are weapons and equipment. And so you're just getting more powerful as you go on. And you just get to decide how things are going to develop. Because you're going to grow either way if you continue to fight, right? To a degree. Because at a certain point, you're going to cap things off level wise for certain jobs, for instance. But you have an option of how you want to grow. And all of it's math, all of it's school. Um, yeah, so there's math not only in the combat, though, but how the worlds are designed. Whether we're talking about like the characters that inhabit the world or the world themselves, right? And you're dealing with scaling and proportions. You're dealing with so many cool things, and just like something like light and something like color, right? These are mathematical things in nature, and how they're used throughout the game. You know, that's all math. Also, while we're here, um, when you defeat the opponents and you like smash them on like the finishing blow, they like crystallize and like explode and they deal additional damage, and that's crazy. In any case, right? There's so much more to talk about um, that you could talk about with Stranger of Paradise in terms of the combat. But anyway, like back to the world though. Yeah, so there's math in the light, math in the color, math in the character design, math in the world design, math in the pacing of the story. You have the idea that you are working through time loops, and we're going to focus in on that story in a little bit. But there's not only math in those things, there's math in designing the game, working with so many people to get everything right. Each person having a role, each person putting in the time, the effort, the energy, and there's also math in the budget and how that's getting used, and math in the marketing, and the programming, you name it. Just math across the board in order to make a game function and flow and create this world that we're all inhabiting and exploring. And I also wanted to mention that one of the things that I mentioned about like growth earlier, I think that's really cool because like so in video games, right, you're growing as the character's growing, they're growing as you're growing. It's an interactive way to practice and build empathy, and that doesn't get talked about enough. I dig it. And yeah, so I could talk about so many other things as far as like math is concerned, but I do want to focus on the story. So in Final Fantasy, um, like Final Fantasy One, it's pretty standard story for the most part. It's good, but pretty standard until you get to the end. Because when you get to the end, and if you played it, you already know, you find out that your characters have been in a time loop, right? Like they were fighting Garland earlier in the game, and Garland gets sent back in time, pulled in by his fiends, um, and he becomes Chaos, and Chaos sends his fiends to the future to pull Garland back, and it's this loop where the Warriors of Light are fighting Garland as Chaos time and time again, and they've been losing time and time again. And you, yes, you, specifically you, the player, you're the one that helps the Warrior of Light, the Warriors of Light finish Chaos. And so that's how it goes in the original game. So in Stranger of Paradise, they take that very bonkers twist, and then they expand that into like the larger narrative. So you find yourself in a loop. You're the Warriors of Light. You start with three, you get four, but then you get a fifth, and that's a whole nother thing. And throughout the games, there's plenty of evidence to support the suspicion that everything isn't what it seems. But you find yourself doing a lot of things that you did in Final Fantasy, and you're wondering what's going on, and it's like heavily indicated that Jack is Garland, and you find out that that's the case by the end of it, right? He's not just Jack; he's Jack Garland, and him, Ash, Jed, Neon, and Sophia are in a loop. They've been in several loops, dying over and over and over again, trying to defeat Chaos, except for it's way more complicated than that, right? That's what they were told. And in actuality, it was the Lufinians having the world where Cornelia is being in a time loop, and the strangers are from Lufinia. Um, and so they were used in this larger plot, and at some point they realized this. They realized the truth, and even though like they're forced to forget, they forge a plan over the course of several loops, and by the end of the game, Jack, aka Garland, ends up being Chaos, and they decide that they're gonna have to train like Warriors of Light, right? They're gonna have Warriors of Light that come from like Cornelia, not Lufinia. And so their plan is to facilitate that, to train them, to figure out ways to make them powerful enough to help them break the loop. And so you have this giant like idea of a retcon here where it's like, okay, well, they still do horrible things, but everyone that we're dealing with as far as the main characters are concerned in Stranger of Paradise, they're doing everything they do in Final Fantasy 1 in order to break the loop. And so I do find it interesting. I like the plot overall. It's like insane. It's maddening. But it's really cool, and like it just is wild stuff. And I've enjoyed playing it, and I'm still playing it right now. And yeah, I do recommend it if some of you all haven't played it. And yeah, so there's been a lot of Final Fantasy in my life in general, but notably the last year, especially, or well, maybe just a little bit more so. In any case, I enjoyed the game, and I hope you enjoyed this video. There are points where I do feel like I didn't have it as tight as I wanted to have, but I had to stop worrying about that, because then if I didn't, I don't think this video would have come out, at least today. And I do like that I realized I was in a loop the whole time, like just like in Stranger of Paradise, just like in Final Fantasy 1. And I like the Warriors of Light in Final Fantasy 1. I broke the loop. I hope you break your own loops out there. I'll see you in the future, Professor Rhyme out.